Hello, Cornerstone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Cornerstone Connection. I want to talk today about Lent and the Ukraine. This last Sunday, we mentioned that this coming Wednesday, tomorrow, March 2nd, is Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is just a day that marks the beginning of a time to prepare our hearts and our souls for Easter. And this preparation to celebrate can be a really important thing. When we're going to celebrate something, we want to prepare, and we need to celebrate Easter. I want to pass along 4 different books that you might use in this time of preparation. One of them I've read, 3 of them I haven't, but they come from authors that are well known and well respected. I'll put the titles down in the description down below so that you can look those up online and probably have them shipped to you by tomorrow if you'd like. The first one is by Paul David Tripp. It's a book called Journey to the Cross. It's a number of reflections on Easter that would help prepare you for it. Paul David Tripp is an excellent author, highly respected in the church. Also, Max Lucado wrote a book called On Calvary's Hill. His writing is often very accessible and can really help turn our hearts back toward God. And then from somebody who is a little bit older author, A.W. Tozer. He was a pastor in Chicago in the earlier part of the 20th century, and he has some excellent writings that help us think well about who God is. And he wrote a book called From the Grave that is also a way to prepare for Easter. One book that I have read and benefited from in the past, and I will be spending time in over these next weeks, is by Walter Wangerin. It's called Reliving the Passion, and I appreciate the perspective that he brings to this idea of reliving the passion of Christ, that we can prepare well for Easter. I appreciate also just the summary that he gives of our goals as we prepare for Easter. He says this: it's a time that we can examine ourselves for our own deep need of Jesus' grace. We can work to understand the crucifixion as the moment of marvelous love and our salvation. And we give thanks to God for a resurrection which promises our own in the end. Those 3 things: examining ourselves to remember our need for salvation, looking to the cross to see the salvation that Jesus has wrought, and then looking past the cross to the resurrection, which reminds us that we too have a resurrection in store for those who are following Christ. Excellent summary of the goals of what we want to do to prepare for Easter. However you are going to be preparing for Easter, I encourage you to take some time to think about, and then to intentionally, over the weeks to come, begin to prepare your mind and your life to celebrate Jesus' resurrection and to remember his death. That's a good, healthy part of following Jesus. Second thing I want to talk about some today is the war that has begun in the Ukraine. And apart from what's actually happening, I want to just take a step back for a second and think about, how do we as Christians respond to news like this? The war in the Ukraine is certainly only the latest example. Whether the cause is something that humans have done or it's a natural cause, there are crises all over the world happening on a weekly, if not daily basis. And when we receive news of these, what do we do with it? 2 simple things I want to encourage you to do. First, don't overreact. It's not the end of the world. The world will end one day, but it won't be because of what any one country is doing. The world will end when Jesus returns to establish his kingdom in totality and in finality. And that will occur, and we don't know when, but we wait for it and we look for it. And we remember that until then, there will be all sorts of devastating things. They don't come as a surprise to us. We don't need to panic. I love what Jesus says to his disciples in John chapter 16. This is the last verse of chapter 16 of John. Jesus says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." I love it because Jesus gives us 2 really clear promises. He tells us that there's going to be trouble, and he tells us that he has overcome. So we don't need to overreact. Second thing, though, that we should remember, we can't overreact. We also need to be careful not to underreact. We need to remember that war brings suffering on a vast scale. And Jesus cares deeply about the suffering of the weak, of the poor, of the hurting. And he calls his people, he calls his church to pray, to care for that suffering as well. So we need to not be blasé about suffering that happens in the world today. We need to not write it off. We need to remember that Jesus cares, and he calls us to care. We can care by praying. Pray for peace. Pray that the war that has started wouldn't spill over. Pray that it would have a quick and just and a peaceful resolution. And then as you pray for peace, I would encourage you also to allow the suffering of those far away from us to reopen your eyes to the suffering that happens near to us, right around us every day. And then when we see that suffering, to respond with love, especially to those who are near to us, especially to those who might be overlooked. There are crises, there are devastations in the world all around us. When we hear of them, when we know of them, we need to not overreact. We need to not underreact. And we do well to allow those crises to turn us again to prayer and to turn us again to loving the people God has put in front of us. Thanks, Cornerstone, for taking a couple of minutes just to spend with me today. Look forward to seeing you this coming Sunday when we're going to be talking again about the church, looking at the fact that the church is God's family. Until then, if you have any thoughts or questions for me, something you want to maybe see if we can address in the sermon or in one of these Cornerstone connections, please email me at brent.castello@ccblaine.org. I would love to connect with you. Thanks so much.